Among Us is probably the most surprising hit of 2020. No other game has triggered as much hype last year as the multiplayer game from the small indie company Sloth. The company has exploded since August 2020 at the latest, even though the game is already over 2 years old. And while not even more than 20 users were active at the time at the beginning, almost 400,000 users stormed the game at the same time in the summer of 2020. Not even gaming giants like GTA 5 or Monster Hunter World have managed that. But how could a game that looks extremely rudimentary visually become such a success? And what is the secret behind the game? These are the questions we want to answer, so we'll show you the unknown truth about Among Us. Also, we will explain to you from which well-known game that probably almost all of you know, Among Us, is cribbed, and what the online game has to do with Adolf Hitler. So be sure to stay tuned here at Wonderlane. Oh, and take this opportunity to tell us which online game you like to play the most, or if you don't like such games at all. We're curious. But before we get into the secret of Among Us' success, we'd like to briefly introduce the basic concept for those who don't know the game yet. In Among Us, 4 to 10 players populate a spaceship that's traveling in space. Each player is given maintenance tasks to complete in the form of minigames. It doesn't sound that exciting at first, but among the crewmates, there are up to 3 traitors, the so-called imposters, who have to sneakily eliminate their ignorant colleagues. In regular emergency meetings, the team then discusses who could be an imposter. The imposters are then, of course, supposed to deflect suspicion, lie, and denounce other players. At the end of the meeting, the crewmates vote on which gamer has to leave the game. If all imposters are found, the crew has won. Among Us is something like the online version of the game Werewolf, and thus a so-called social deduction game. In other words, it's a role-playing game in which possible opponents act in secret and have to be unmasked. So these kinds of games are absolutely nothing new. But how did Among Us become so successful? First of all, let's take a look at the story behind the game's creation. As mentioned at the beginning, the game was developed 3 years ago by the small video game company Sloth. Sloth consists of just 3 developers: the programmer, Forrest Willard, and the 2 game designers, Marcus Bromander and Amy Liu. When they developed Among Us in 2018, they were actually inspired by the already well-known board game Werewolf. Originally, Among Us was going to be a local multiplayer game that they wanted to release exclusively as a mobile app. It was released in June 2018, and initially had an average player count of 30 to 50 players at a time. The creators admit today that they did extremely poor marketing, and in fact, they came close to dropping everything several times. Allegedly, at some times, there were so few users online that not even one game could be played. But the users who remained loyal to the game were so enthusiastic that Sloth continued to work on the game, and finally released a PC version on Steam in November 2018. Moreover, more editions followed, and the team released updates almost weekly. Nevertheless, the breakthrough failed to materialize, and Willard himself says today that the team stayed on the game much longer than would have made sense from an economic point of view. They were only able to do this because they had sufficient savings. So, the Sloth team acted absolutely irrationally, and they ran the risk of wasting not only their time, but also a bunch of money. But their perseverance would pay off, as more and more players eventually became aware of Among Us. Among them was Twitch streamer Sodapoppin, who promoted the game among his 2.8 million subscribers in July 2020. It didn't take long for other influencers, Let's Players, and streamers to take notice of the game and play it in front of their followers. Among them were such greats as PewDiePie, MrBeast, Dream, and also a bunch of streamers from Europe. This is how the game became internationally successful. Now, on average, more than 100,000 users play the game at the same time, and at peak times, there were an incredible 400,000 users. Among Us owes its immense success to the streamers, but also to the Twitch platform, and it is an excellent example of how important viral marketing has become, and what influence this type of advertising has on consumers. Viral marketing aims to ensure that a product or game is shared as often as possible by its target group on the respective social media platform and becomes increasingly well known. Ultimately, it should then go viral. Many commercials for well-known brands and products have already become extremely famous in this way, but even musicians or memes. So, viral marketing has immense power in our digital age, but it's very difficult to control the success of this type of advertising. Even large companies put a large part of their budgets into viral marketing. Among Us didn't do just that, but the game itself promises an extremely high multiplication factor. After all, it's the most fun when you play it in a group of 10 people. But that alone is not the reason why Among Us went viral and became so successful. Instead, there are other success factors behind the multiplayer game, which we would like to explain to you here. Number 1. Among Us is a so-called social deduction game, meaning a game in which the participants have to take on different roles. Such games are largely based on the player's ability to influence the other participants, to lie to them credibly, and to expose other liars. So, it's a kind of social experiment, and that's exactly what fascinates so many. Social deduction games are absolutely nothing new. However, there has never been an online game, and the creators of Inner Sloth filled this gap in the market. They also used popular game hits like Werewolf and Secret Hitler, which is also already considered a real cult game. In Secret Hitler, players are transported to Germany in the 1930s. More precisely, to the evening before Adolf Hitler became Chancellor. The goal of the game is to unmask the secret Hitler and his fellow fascists and secure democracy. Number 2. Not only is the look of Among Us extremely simple, but the rules are also easy to understand, which makes it easier to get started. In addition, this means that really everyone can play along. Even introverts who don't feel like talking to strangers directly can use the chat function in the emergency meetings. So, a microphone is not absolutely necessary. In addition, the cost of just €4 is so low that you don't have to think twice about whether you should give the game a chance or not. Number 3. Although Among Us has been on the market for 2 years, it only became so successful during the current pandemic. A coincidence? Hardly. Because while people around the world were on lockdown and social distancing in 2020, the longing for normality is growing. Video games allow us to immerse ourselves in another world and forget reality for a moment. This is not a bad quality, especially in times of the corona pandemic. In addition, multiplayer games, like Among Us, allow us to stay in touch with our friends, and the discussions in emergency meetings create a sense of teamwork. Media psychologists have also long recognized this phenomenon, and are certain that online communication in multiplayer games can go some way to alleviating the social isolation that many people feel in these times. Therefore, it is perhaps no wonder that the game has been able to spread. Number 4. The fourth success factor leads back to the creation of the game, and the fact that the developers had to survive a lean period, and they had the courage to act uneconomically. The developers, all 3 of them friends in college by the way, believed in their game and put all of their savings into making their game a success. They have worked full-time for their company for the past 3 years, doing everything from development to marketing and merchandise themselves. Therefore, their obsession with quality and perseverance is an extremely important factor in the game's incredible success. That's it for our video. Feel free to let us know in the comments what you think of Among Us, and if you've even played the game yourself. Otherwise, like this video if you enjoyed it, and see you next time here at Wonderlane.